In Japan, there is a belief that objects are never truly empty, that if something is given attention for long enough, it begins to listen. This belief is old, older than modern cities, older than the internet, and it is why dolls in Japan are not treated as toys, but as vessels. Things shaped like people are believed to confuse spirits, especially those that no longer remember what they are. This story comes from a ritual known as Hitori Kakurenbo. It translates to one man hide and seek. The account you're about to hear comes from a man named Kenta, a 21-year-old university student living alone in Japan. Story of a man where he tried the ritual alone. He lived in a small apartment, quiet enough that every sound felt deliberate. The kind of place where the walls held noise a little too long and the silence at night felt heavy rather than peaceful. He spent most evenings awake, scrolling on his phone long after midnight, not out of interest, out of habit. The apartment felt empty in a way that made him uncomfortable, as if it was waiting for something to happen. That was when he first read about the ritual. What unsettled him wasn't the horror stories themselves, but how consistent they were. Different people, different years, all describing the same details, the same atmosphere, the same regret afterwards. He didn't believe it would work, but he wanted to know if the emptiness he felt had a reason. The doll had been in his apartment since he moved in. He couldn't remember where it came from, only that it had stayed unpacked, sitting untouched on a shelf. When he finally picked it up, he noticed how uneven it felt in his hands. Not heavier, just wrong, as if its weight didn't sit where it should. He turned off the lights, closed the curtains, and moved slowly through the apartment, as though rushing might ruin something. When he placed the doll on the floor and stepped back, the room felt different, quieter, smaller. He told himself it was his nerves. After that, he followed what the post described as the proper way to begin. He spoke aloud to the empty room, announcing the start of the game even though no one answered. He moved away from the doll deliberately, taking care not to look back too quickly. Every action felt strangely formal, as if the apartment itself was paying attention. He remembered pausing at certain points, waiting longer than felt natural, listening to the sound of his own breathing. He avoided mirrors, he avoided corners, he tried to keep his movements calm, because the stories warned that hesitation mattered just as much as intention. When he finally stopped and waited, he felt a quiet certainty that whatever needed to be done had been done correctly. For a long time, nothing happened. He sat in the dark, tapping his phone without looking at it, listening to the familiar sounds of the building, pipes shifting, distant traffic, and neighbors' television through the wall. Then the background noise stopped. Not all at once, just enough that he noticed it. The refrigerator went silent. The air felt heavier, like the apartment had been filled with something invisible. At the end of the hallway, the bathroom door stood slightly open. He stayed where he was. When he finally looked back towards the room, he felt a flicker of confusion. The doll was still there, but something about it felt off. Its head was tilted slightly now. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to make him doubt his memory. The distance between him and the doll felt shorter. He didn't remember moving. He felt it before he understood it. A pressure behind him, like someone standing too close without touching. The kind of presence you notice on a crowded train, even with your eyes closed. He didn't turn around. Instead, the television turned on by itself. The screen filled itself with static, crawling slowly, rearranging itself as if it was searching for a shape it couldn't quite find. The volume lowered on its own, muting the noise until the sound became more uncomfortable than silent. He became aware that he was being watched, not from the television, not from the doll, from behind. The apartment no longer felt like a place he was inside of. It felt like something else had stepped into it. Something that knew the layout better than he did. When he passed the mirror in the hallway, he stopped. His reflection was there, but not exactly. When he shifted his weight, the reflection followed a moment too late. When he blinked, the blink came after, just long enough to be noticed. He leaned closer. In the mirror, something stood behind him. The doll was visible only in the reflection. Upright, too straight, its empty eyes faced forward, not at him, but through him. He did not turn around. The realization came quietly. Whatever this was, it was no longer a game. The apartment was no longer responding to him the way it should. He ended the ritual the way the story said you were supposed to. His voice shook as he spoke, even though no one answered. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, exhausted but unable to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the same pressure behind him, as if something was standing just out of view. The dreams, when they came, were always the same, being submerged, unable to move, watching something approach from the dark. That morning, he noticed the footprints. They were wet, spaced unevenly, leading across from the apartment floor. They didn't match his feet. There was no source of water, no explanation. They stopped in front of the shelf, and the doll was gone. He moved out not long after. He says he still avoids mirrors at night. He says the feeling of being watched never fully left. And he believes Hitori Kakarenbo doesn't summon something into your house. It simply teaches something where you live. And once it knows that, hide and seek never really ends. People in the Midlands still know where the trees change. You can walk through the countryside all day and feel fine, and then suddenly the air tightens. Sound doesn't travel as far. Birds stop calling, the ground dips slightly, like the land itself has decided not to advertise what comes next. That's where this story takes place. The man who told it was called Thomas. He was 23, renting a small place outside a village that backed directly into the woodland. During the day, the forest looked ordinary enough. Footpaths, brambles, old oaks, but in the evening, locals locked their doors earlier than they needed to and kept their dogs close. When Thomas asked about the woods, people changed the subject, not abruptly, just enough to let him know the conversation was over. He didn't grow up with the stories. He found them later, online, while trying to work out why the village felt nervous after sunset. The name came up again and again in fragments rather than in explanations. Black Anise. Descriptions didn't line up perfectly, but the details that mattered always stayed the same. A woman-shaped thing, dark-skinned or soot black, long arms, iron claws, living in hollow trees or earthen dens, wearing what she took. What unsettled Thomas wasn't the creature itself, it was the idea that people didn't call for her, they made themselves visible. The ritual wasn't dramatic. There were no symbols, no chants, no offerings, just conditions. You went alone, you went near dusk, and you made a small mark that proved you had been there on purpose. The old post stressed one thing more than anything else. Hesitation ruined it. Fear invited worse outcomes. If you were going to do it, you had to behave as though you belonged there. Thomas told himself that meant nothing. Still, the next evening, he left his phone behind and walked towards the tree line. He stopped just inside the woods, where the light thinned but hadn't disappeared completely. He waited until the sounds of the village fell away, until even the wind seemed reluctant to move. Then he did what the stories described. He dragged his fingers slowly across the bark of a nearby tree, hard enough to leave marks, controlled enough to stay quiet. It felt deliberate, personal. After that, he stepped back and waited. The change was immediate. The space between the trees felt wrong, as if depth itself had shortened. Paths that had been obvious a moment earlier no longer stood out. The forest didn't feel hostile yet, just attentive. The next step mattered. He was supposed to turn away and walk deeper in, without rushing, without checking behind him. Thomas hesitated, then he moved. He had taken fewer than 10 steps when he realized the sounds above him were keeping pace. Not footsteps, weight shifting, branches flexing, something large adjusting itself without urgency. He told himself it was an animal. Then it breathed. Slow, wet, measured. The sound came from higher than it should have. His foot caught on a root and he stumbled. The breathing stopped. So did everything else. The forest fell into a silence so complete, it felt manufactured. That was when something dropped into the leaves ahead of him. Not hard, not fast, close. The stories were clear about this part. If she appeared, movement was a mistake. Stillness was the only thing that brought time. Thomas stayed where he was, heart hammering, eyes burning from holding them open. He could see her now, not fully but enough. Arms too long, bending where they shouldn't, skin dark and uneven, stretched tight in places. A face that caught the last scraps of daylight and reflected none of it back. She didn't rush him. She leaned closer. He broke. The moment he turned, the forest reacted. Branches tore at him, roots caught his feet. The breathing returned, faster now, closer, cutting in and out between steps. Something scraped his hand as he fell. He doesn't remember leaving the trees, only hitting the open ground and screaming. He reached the edge of the village as night fully settled in. No one asked questions. They noticed his hands first, long, deep scratches across his palms, matching the marks he had left on the tree. An old woman told him quietly to wash them before dark. He didn't ask why. Thomas left the village 2 days later. The scratches faded, but the scars didn't. And he believes the ritual did exactly what it was meant to do. Because Black Anis doesn't always take what she finds. Sometimes she lets you leave, marked, remembered, and aware that next time she won't need you to announce yourself. There are videos online that never explain themselves. No narration, no faces, just elevators moving through empty buildings at night. Most of those videos are staged. This story is not about one of those fake videos. The man who told us this story lived alone in a high-rise apartment building on the outskirts of Seoul. He was 24. He worked late. He usually came home when the building was already quiet. He had used the same elevator every day for nearly 2 years. That's why he chose it. He learned about the elevator game by accident. Someone mentioned it in a comment under an unrelated post. No explanation, just a warning not to try it in a building where someone might interrupt you. He searched for it later. The instructions were inconsistent, badly written, often contradicting each other. Different floor numbers, different explanations for what might happen. What stayed the same was the warning at the end. Once you begin, you finish the sequence. Stopping early was described as worse than failing. He waited for a night when the building felt empty. No doors opening, no footsteps in the hall, no movement on the security monitor in the lobby. He stepped into the elevator alone. He pressed the first button and watched the doors close. The elevator rose a few floors and stopped. The chime sounded. The doors opened onto an empty corridor. He pressed the next number. The elevator descended this time. Another stop, another empty hallway. He followed the sequence exactly as he remembered it, pressing each number only after the doors had fully closed. He made himself wait between presses, afraid that rushing would count as impatience. Up again, then down again, then up once more. The order felt unnatural for a residential building. The elevator kept revisiting the same section of floors, never settling into a direction. When he pressed the next button, the elevator hesitated, not long enough to trigger an alarm, just long enough to notice. The lights dimmed slightly before stabilizing. He didn't touch anything else. The instructions he'd read were clear about this part. Once the sequence begins, you don't correct it. The doors opened. Someone was standing outside, a woman. She stood just far enough back that the hallway behind her was difficult to see. She didn't move, she didn't react to the doors opening. This was the moment most of the accounts focused on. You were not supposed to speak to her, you were not supposed to acknowledge her, and you were not supposed to look directly at her face. He kept his eyes forward, but he made a mistake. He glanced down at the reflection in the elevator's metal panel, just long enough to confirm that someone was there. He looked away immediately. The doors closed. The elevator continued moving. He could feel the space inside the elevator differently now. Not visually, physically, like the air had thickened or rearranged itself. He pressed the next button in the sequence. The elevator rose. The doors opened onto a hallway that didn't match the building. The lights were dimmer, the corridors stretched farther than it should have. The walls were bare. According to some versions of the story, this was where you were meant to leave. According to others, leaving here was how people disappeared. He stayed inside. The doors closed, the elevator began moving again, but the sensation was wrong. There was no vibration, no sound from the cables, the floor indicator stopped changing, then the elevator stopped completely. When the doors opened, there was no hallway, there was no darkness either, there was just space, flat, pale, empty, without edges or depth. This was the floor that appeared in the few accounts that ended badly. The problem was that no one agreed on what you were supposed to do here. Some said you had to step out immediately. Others said stepping out was how people were lost. A few claimed that you were meant to wait for the doors to close on their own, no matter how long it took. The posts never explained why. They just stopped updating. He stood in the doorway, 1 foot still inside the elevator. The space outside didn't look empty in the way a room looks empty. It looks unfinished. There were no edges, no shadows, no sense of scale. The color never changed no matter where he focused. His eyes couldn't settle on anything long enough to decide how far away it was. He became aware of a low pressure in his ears, like being underwater. He waited. The elevator doors stayed open. He checked the floor indicator above the doors. It was blank, no number, no light. He stepped fully out. The space did not react. There was no resistance now, no pressure, no indication that it registered his presence at all. That was worse. He took a few steps forward, then stopped. That was when he noticed he was no longer alone. She stood some distance away, where the space should not have allowed distance to exist at all. A woman. She was very tall, tall enough that her proportions felt wrong. Even here, her head rose higher than it should have. Her posture perfectly upright, as if the space had been scaled incorrectly around her. She wore a wide-brimmed hat. The brim cast a soft shadow across her face, hiding nothing completely, but obscuring just enough to make it difficult to decide where her eyes ended and the shadows began. She was beautiful, not in an exaggerated way, not in a way that demanded attention. Her features were balanced, calm, intentional, the kind of beauty that felt finished. Her body was equally precise, long lines, graceful proportions, nothing distorted, nothing out of place, except for her height, and the fact that she was there at all. She did not approach him, she did not gesture him, she did not speak, she only looked at him. Her gaze was steady, level, exact, not curious, not hostile, as if she had been waiting for him to notice. He became aware that the space felt different where she stood, not darker, not closer, just settled, as though something about her presence had given it definition. He tried to look away. The moment he shifted his focus, the sense of orientation failed. He could no longer tell where she had been standing, only that she was still there, looking. This was not mentioned in any versions of the game. There were no warnings about someone appearing here. No instructions for what to do if you were seen. That omission felt deliberate. After an amount of time he could not measure, something existed behind him again. The elevator stood there, doors already opened. When he looked back, the woman was gone. The space felt unfinished again. He didn't wait, he stepped inside immediately. The doors closed without delay. The elevator dropped fast enough to force breath from his chest. Then it stopped. The doors opened onto his building. Same floor, same lighting, same quiet hum. Everything looked normal. It took him days to realize what hadn't come with him. Automatic doors didn't always open, security cameras failed to track him consistently, and reflections lagged by half a second. People didn't ignore him, they just didn't quite notice him. He moved out within the month. He avoids elevators now, even in public buildings. He takes the stairs no matter how high. He believes the game doesn't just send you somewhere else, it adjusts something. And if you make mistakes, you don't return in exactly the same state you left.